Hello, hello. So, relationships. We all have relationships with our children, our spouses, our girlfriends, our bosses. Relationships like sometimes they go very well, sometimes they go very badly. We can be enamored, we can fall in love and have agape, and then we can have pure hatred, and sometimes it can be fixed, sometimes it's over, sometimes it's good to just have borders and keep a distance, be patient, depending on what you want to do with the relationship. I believe one should have good relations, like with everybody. I'm not a peace sneak, but I prefer peace and harmony. And today we're talking about relationships between countries, and more specifically, the relationship between South Africa and the United States. South Africa is like a medium country. We have many challenges, but we also have a lot of opportunities and strengths. And the United States is, so far the eminent and dominant superpower. So there is obviously some asymmetry in the relationship, and the onus, the responsibility of South Africa is to do some of basically to do the heavy lifting. Although the United States also has a responsibility, because if you annoy South Africa enough, I'm South African, by the way, we can just open a Chinese base in Cape Town, we can open a Russian base in Durban, we can get a Brazilian base in Port Nolloth. There's many things we can do. We can take a 10-year period, which will be painful, to shift our positive trade balance with the United States towards Europe, the Middle East, and possibly Asia and South America. It will be painful, but it can be done. Just like the United States, wants to realign itself. And there's no problem inherently with it, but a lot of people say we're now in this multipolar world, and that's true. We are moving to a multipolar world, but when many people talk about it, it comes from a place of darkness. They're just glad, they can get rid of certain people, for example, they can get rid of brown people, or they can win the war against China, or whatever, the war against China or whatever. And this is nonsense. If you're going to pursue the strategy of the multipolar world, then essentially you need to you still need alliances, because if you're not going to go for bipolar or monopolar, then essentially you need allies for at least basically not to be overrun or to be dominated. And if you can't have allies, then at least have a healthy relationship with a neutral country of medium strength, let's say Switzerland or Austria or South Africa or Argentina or something like that, so that if you go into a very bad relationship with your adversaries, which you still have in this multipolar world, then at least you can rely on trade with your neutral partners, and at least your neutral partners won't threaten you by allowing foreign bases into their country. So large countries like the United States and China needs to realize, they do realize it already, although not everyone in their countries realize it, usually nationalists, and the other one, not patriots, populists. Yeah, it's populism is almost the opposite of patriotism. They think, they can do whatever they want. That's not how it works. In realpolitik, as created or defined by Otto von Bismarck in the 1830s or whatever, there's like real consequences to your actions, and it's therefore you have to have good relationships. So without further ado, let's talk about the United States and South Africa's relationship, a very important one. And South Africa has a positive trade balance with the United States. We have a negative trade balance with China. So the United States is very important. It cannot be denied. Also, the United States is a democracy with free speech, as is South Africa. So, when there are overlaps, you need to appreciate it, and essentially you need to build on it because it exists already. Likewise, when we talk about China or India, these are countries that's more culturally, they are more orientated towards community, like social ties, and South Africa is like that too. So, we have these overlaps with different countries. Therefore, we have different relationships, and some are more important than others. But let me get straight to the relationship we have with the United States. So the United States' relations with South Africa have evolved through distinct historical epochs, shaped by strategic considerations, moral debates, and economic interests. From early trade routes to Cold War alliances, from anti-apartheid activism to today's geopolitical realignments, the relationship has been marked by both cooperation and tension. As global power dynamics shift, understanding the depth and complexity of this bilateral relationship is crucial. This essay traces the long arc of South African-US engagement from the 17th century through to the 2020s, emphasizing key diplomatic, economic, military, cultural, and strategic developments. So, number one, early interactions and colonial interests. Through formal US-South African diplomatic relations only began in the 20th century because, South Africa is a new country. The modern version only started in 1914. American whaling ships docked at Cape Town as early as 1799. Cape Town served as a crucial resupply station for ships sailing between the US and Asia. So that's quite interesting. Whalers, whaling, these whale ships, like sperm whales, like those of you who've seen the movie Moby Dick, or there's the movie Moby Dick, and then there's the other one, Eye of the Heart of the Ocean or something, where they show this whale hunting in the 1880s. Yeah, that was basically the oil and gas rigs of the 21st century. That was basically the oil and gas rigs of the 20th century. You have to hunt this whale, which is a dangerous endeavor. You go out in this, you have a mothership, but the mothership's too slow to chase the whale. So you have to go out in smaller ships, rowboats. Then you have to harpoon the whale and get the precious oil from its basically for those of you, this is a very unnecessary tangent, but basically whales, these baleen whales or the deep diving whales, have this viscous oil in the top of their heads that basically help them. It's a ballast. So the viscosity changes under pressure. So if you go deeper, it becomes heavier, and if you go up, it becomes lighter. So it helps them because they dive down to something insane, not 2 kilometers, a kilometer or something. It's insanely deep how deep they go to get their prey, which is the, what do you call it, not the octopus, the giant squid, the Humboldt squid. They have to dive really deep, and this is was a very lucrative business because this oil it was the most perfect oil to use in an oil lamp. So essentially, it was a lucrative business, and Cape Town is the perfect port to do a resupply. It was safe, it was convenient, and it's between the two major oceans. So it's just interesting that they docked there. It must have been an experience, though, for an American to, in the 1880s or, the 1800s to basically go to Africa for the first time and see how it works. In any case, by the 1800s, American missionaries such as Daniel Lindley were active amongst the Zulus, that's the biggest tribe, contributing to education and healthcare, and U.S. merchants were trading with both the Cape Colony and the Boer republics. In 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant received Paul Kruger and other Boer leaders during a diplomatic visit. Though largely symbolic, this visit underscored early U.S. interest in Southern Africa. The U.S. remained neutral during the Anglo-Boer Wars of 1899 to 1902, but American public opinion favored the Boers, who were perceived as rugged Republicans resisting British imperialism. Mark Twain even commented, "The Boers are fighting for the same independence that gave birth to the American nation." Yeah, basically, at that time, like 1899 to 1902, those of you history buffs will know that's the time that America was at war with Spain, specifically over the Philippines and Cuba and Puerto Rico. And especially in Cuba and the Philippines, the Americans were pretty harsh and, fighting the war. And, the Cubans and the Filipinos resisted, especially the Filipinos, because they just saw it for what it was, like another colonial overlord, trying to rule them. And it would have been very hypocritical of a US president to support another anti-colonial battle where they're doing a pro-colonial one. Secondly, both are Saxon nations, so there's this understanding between them, just this cultural, affiliation and similarity. And then thirdly, the UK for them at that time was one of the most important trading partners because, at that time, 1899, the UK had it had the world's largest empire. As they said of Victorian England, the sun doesn't set on the British Empire. So it's not it's totally understandable that the US took their side, but this is how it started off. The Europeans were friendlier towards South Africa. Continental Europe was friendlier towards South Africa at that time, the Boer Wars, than the United States. By 1929, the US had established a consulate in Johannesburg. By 1936, US investment in South Africa had reached over $100 million. Geez, that's a huge amount of money for 1936. So obviously the Americans were very interested. Gold was discovered in the late 1800s in South Africa. So that's where mining comes in. And although America had a lot of gold as well at the time, California and Alaska, basically South Africa also had a lot of gold. And it was easier, obviously, to extract in South Africa than it was to extract in Alaska. So hence the interest, I guess. But also, if we look at 1936, we are talking about uranium. And uranium became super important during the Cold War. So, number 2, the Cold War and apartheid realpolitik, 1948 to 1990. Strategic interests and nuclear collaboration coincided with the rise of apartheid in 1948. Which was also the beginning of the Cold War, more or less. The US prioritized anti-Soviet alliances, increasingly seeing South Africa as a strategic partner. Between 1953 and 1975, the US imported nearly 36,000 tons of uranium from South Africa under the Atoms for Peace program. just as a note, a side note, a lot of people always say, oh, South Africa's so wealthy, you've got so many resources. That's true. But like, remember something like uranium, you don't need a lot of uranium, well, enriched uranium, to last you a very long time. So South Africans also need to appreciate the fact that once something is mined, it's not something that's going to be in demand forever, because it gets recycled. Like platinum will get recycled, gold will get recycled, uranium can last a very long time. So South Africans also should know their place, in terms of that. Like, I don't think South Africans always understand how international supply chains work, hence the importance of the relationship with the US. Simonstown Naval Base, transferred from Britain to South Africa in 1957, became a key logistical hub for the US Navy in the Southern Hemisphere, with American ships using the facility during Indian Ocean deployments. Yeah, Simonstown is the biggest naval base in South Africa. It's just south of Cape Town on this, what do they call it? It's this peninsula, the small peninsula. And yeah, like, if you just need to look at a map, South Africa divides the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic and there's this, well, it's large, but you may call it a choke point between Antarctica and South Africa. And if you have enough submarines, you can basically dominate that area. Plus, like, if you use aerial bases from South Africa, you can bomb the shit out of like many vessels. No, not all of them, because it's still it's still a couple of thousands of kilometers if you go south before you reach Antarctica. But it's not 10,000, it's maybe 3,000. So, like, if you have like some assets there, you can protect the Atlantic from invasion of the East. And that's also, incidentally, why South Africa was so important for the UK during World War II, because they were afraid that the Japanese, because at one stage the Japanese they were doing very well. Like, they took over like Singapore, they took over Hong Kong, they were like invading India. So at one stage they thought, okay, they will like take over South Africa and actually link up with the Nazis. So yeah, Cape Town, very strategically very important, and the Americans shouldn't forget that. Like, South Africa, if South Africa's pissed off, they can open a Chinese base there very easily. During the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan's policy of constructive engagement, promoted by Assistant Secretary of State Chester Crocker, sought to influence South Africa through diplomacy and business ties rather than sanctions. The approach mirrored broader Reagan doctrine thinking, which prioritized anti-communism over human rights enforcement. Yeah, I like Reagan a bit in the sense that he was reasonably decisive, but a lot of the stuff he did was basically morally reprehensible. Like, for example, what they did in Central America, what they did to Iran. And yeah, Reagan was a big enabler of the South African apartheid regime in its latter stage, in the latter, just before the fall of apartheid. Reagan was a big enabler. Like, under senior Bush, some questions were being asked. Like, okay, you have a massive human rights record. Remember, at that stage, when the Cold War ended, South Africa was no longer a useful ally, because remember, half of American elections are always almost 50-50. You never get a 70-30% result in an election. It's like 50, 55, 45. Then they call it a landslide. Usually it's like 53, 47, something like that. So now, and a lot of them are swing voters, like maybe 20-30% or swing, 20% or swing voters. So now you have to convince Americans, and like now the media is showing all this like destruction of apartheid, like on TV and in the newspapers. Now a lot of Democrats see that, look, the Soviet Union isn't dangerous anymore. Like, and these people that's supposed to be our friends are killing black people in droves, or at least discriminating against them heavily. We cannot support this. So under the senior Bush, you started seeing, some unease, and then sanctions followed, like essentially, which was the right thing from the United States. But Reagan wasn't, interested. Reagan wanted to end maybe righteously so, he wanted to end the Soviet Union as soon as possible, because the Soviet Union was pretty bloody as well. Like the Afghan war cost the lives of like 1 million people. Yeah, like I think 1 million Afghans died in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Very bloody. So getting back to Reagan, so his liking of South Africa drew a lot of intense domestic criticism in the US. The Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 passed over Reagan's veto, imposed sanctions, restricted air travel by South African Airways, and banned new US investments in the country. Yeah, like this is the, like BDS, boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions. This is South Africa became free for multiple reasons, and the end of the Cold, obviously the vicious, or rather heroical and resilient fighting of the freedom forces in South Africa. But also there was union action, constant strikes by COSATU in South Africa stopped South African business. But then also basically sanctions and divestment and cultural isolation. South Africa, like under apartheid, white people still believed or liked to believe that they were morally superior and, popular in the world. But when New Zealand no longer wants to play rugby against you because you're a skunk, then you start with some soul searching. And well, good on New Zealand and like these countries who started sanctions, because apartheid had to go. I don't think, if you're a normal person, that apartheid was a good thing. And it's good that the United States changed its mind. So from 1984 to 1989, over 200 US corporations, including Coca-Cola, IBM, General Motors, and Citibank, divested from South Africa. Divestment campaigns on university campuses in city councils led to the withdrawal of billions in assets. Harvard, Stanford, and the University of California spearheaded this movement. By 1990, I almost said 1900. By 1990, US corporate holdings had decreased by $4 billion. Yeah, Coca-Cola, if that, starts divesting from South Africa, IBM, General Motors. That's why General Motors is still not that popular in South Africa, simply because they divested for such a long time that Volkswagen and Toyota filled the market gap. So it's not, it's much. Ford didn't. Ford Motor Company. So you'll see much. This is why, for those of you who are American, if you go to South Africa, you'll see way more Fords on South African roads than you'll see any General Motors like product. However, IBM obviously made a strong comeback because, in the 1990s you needed IBM, so it was essential. So they obviously were very important. Number 3, the Mandela era and rebuilding trust, 1990 to the year 2000. Following his 1990 release, Nelson Mandela toured the United States to thunderous applause. Well, Nelson Mandela got thunderous applause wherever he went. In 1994, as South Africa's first democratic president, he addressed the joint session of Congress and received the Congressional Golden Medal. President Bill Clinton's visit to South Africa in 1998 marked the first ever official state visit by a sitting US president. Yeah, I remember that when Bill Clinton visited us, it was a big thing. It was a really, really big thing. And that's where it basically, the good stuff started kicking off. Between 1994 and 2000, USAID provided, that's abbreviation, USAID, provided over $1.3 billion in assistance to South Africa. It supported land restitution, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, voter education through the Independent Electoral Commission, or IEC, and judicial transformation initiatives. American judges and NGOs provided extensive training to new magistrates under the post-apartheid legal framework. Yeah, so look, South Africa wasn't like totally incompetent with law, but the laws we had were apartheid laws. And the judges in place were so used, especially if you're an older person, I guess, were so used to passing judgment using these laws, it's kind of a shock to the system to go over to something, not the opposite, but just to neutral. And you have to get training. If you're if you're a closed-minded person, you're out. But if you're smart and you can go back to neutral from right wing, that can be done by retraining, and then you can become a good judge again. Well, you were probably never a good judge, but then you can become a good judge. Like Game of Thrones character development. I can imagine a lot of apartheid. Well, they did. A lot of apartheid judges actually became pretty good judges in South Africa. I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying most of them, and this can be measured if you go and look at South African jurisprudence, laws, cases that were done. You can go and have a look at it. And well, those of you who are lawyers, South African lawyers, I guess, if you disagree with me, cool. And let it be known in the comments section. Also, if you know about any how America aided South Africa with regards to USAID and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and elections, let us know. It'll be interesting. In 1997, the Binational Commission, co-chaired by Vice President Al Gore and Deputy President Thabo Mbeki, became the key platform for collaboration. The Commission oversaw partnerships in agriculture, energy, science, and environmental policy. An amusing anecdote during this Commission event was that Mbeki insisted American delegates try South African rooibos tea, including leading to a now famous diplomatic tweet comparing it to South African red gold. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, rooibos tea is super nice. It's super delicious. I'm not saying this because I'm South African. It's really good. It's got no caffeine. It's got no caffeine in it. It's got loads of antioxidants. And most importantly of all, it's delicious, and it's healthy. It's delicious. It smells very good. You can use the tea bag twice, or you can use the leaves twice. They've got this retentive quality of flavor. And you can also, you can even make cappuccino of it. If you grind the rooibos to a dust, you can put it through a cappuccino machine and get a rooibos cappuccino. It's basically exactly like a coffee cappuccino, just got the rooibos flavor. And you can make facial cream from rooibos, hand cream. You can make soap, or you can use it as a ingredient to soap, shampoo. you can get just buy the extract like of rooibos. And about rooibos, it will only grow in South Africa for some reason. It won't grow. They tried growing it in Australia. They tried growing it in California with similar climates than the South African. It grows in the South African desert, but it wouldn't grow. So, yeah, I would strongly agree with the statement South African red gold. Number 4, economic relations, growth, tensions, and trade mechanisms. The bilateral trade evolution between South Africa and the US. Trade between the US and South Africa rose from $5.7 billion in 2000 to $21.4 billion in 2023. That's massive. South Africa's exports vehicles, especially BMW and Mercedes-Benz models, citrus fruits, platinum, wine, and iron ore. The US exports electronics, aircraft parts, pharmaceuticals, and heavy machinery. Yeah, vehicles especially, so South Africa doesn't have its own brands, but we are manufacturing because of our skills and price benefit. We do make lots of vehicles. And the nature of the Volkswagen, BMW and Mercedes-Benz companies is that they make certain models in certain countries. So I think it's the 3 Series. Yeah, because the 3 Series is very popular in South Africa for BMW. So I think that's exported. Incidentally, we import the 7 Series because it's a very expensive car. Not a lot of people buy it. So it doesn't make sense to make it in the country. But because we have a large commercial market, a local market, it's easy just to make a couple of more BMWs and export it to the US. And that's cheaper for the company, for Volkswagen for BMW. And we make a lot of money through vehicles, exporting vehicles to South Africa. By the way, the South African vehicle industry is under a lot of pressure for various reasons, but I'm not going to go into that straight away. Then there's something called AGOA, or the African Growth and Opportunities Act, that was passed in the year 2000, that allows duty-free access to the US market for eligible African exports. In 2022, South Africa exported $3.3 billion under AGOA. Notably, BMW's Rosslyn plant near Pretoria exported nearly 50,000 cars to the US that year alone. So, essentially, AGOA is very beneficial to South Africa. We make a lot of extra money through it. And I believe this was a way for the US to have soft power in South Africa. Instead of just giving us a bunch of aid, this is a way for us to help ourselves. And I don't think South Africans are as thankful as they should be for AGOA. AGOA is, especially now that we have so many economic problems, people always like to think that it can't get any worse. Your life can't get any worse. Anything can't get any worse. Your car can't get any worse. Your pet can't get sicker or any worse. Your car can't break down any more than it already has. Things can always get worse. Always. It can basically unless you die, but it can always get worse. You can argue that your death may affect, if you're the CEO of a company and you die, then it's worse as well because the company is then leaderless. So things can always get worse, and South Africa is not thankful enough for AGOA. I can say that from reading a lot of social media tweets. We should be thankful for AGOA and we should protect AGOA. some investment statistics. The US direct foreign investment, or FDI, in South Africa reached $7.3 billion in 2022, concentrated in mining, manufacturing, and financial services. South African investment in the US also grew, with Sasol's $13 billion petrochemical plant in Lake Charles, Louisiana, representing the largest ever African investment in the United States. Yeah, so Africa can invest in the United States. And actually, this is like another reason why any country on earth should treasure its African relations. Like when you think of Africa, foreigners think about Africa, they quite often think like, oh yes, these people are always beggars. They're always, they're a charity case. They can't do anything for themselves. Well, in many cases that's true, but Africa probably has more potential than any other continent on earth. If you look at it in terms of like agricultural land, like geography, the amount of rain you get, especially in the center of the continent. Like the DRC is contains the second largest rainforest on earth. You get basically all the minerals globally you get in Africa, even rare earths. It's just not being exploited. There's a lot of there's a lot of uranium. And South Africa, Africa's population is growing quicker than any other continent, even India. So soon Africa will actually have a larger population than India, and India has already overtaken China. So usually, as Peter Zeihan said, the American analyst, demographic growth is very important to economy. If you open Economics 101 textbook, you'll see that basically capital plus humans equals the economy. So that's why Africa is important. And Africa is growing. There's many countries that has a rapid economic growth rate. Angola, for example, is growing at 8%. I think Mozambique as well, growing at 8%. South Africa's not doing well. We're growing at 1% or 0.5% or something at the moment. Maybe South Africa can learn a lot from its other African countries. Ethiopia is growing rapidly. Nigeria is growing a bit. So everyone is growing. Africans are very good at piggybacking. That is implementing new technologies from abroad in Africa, specifically the internet. We have started developing our own robotics, using robotics. We have a lot of IT startups for AI, these kinds of things, networking. We also are very adept at implementing renewable energy, especially in remote areas. And I think I said it in a different video, but I'm a big proponent of populating the countryside as opposed to building, massive cities, unless it's smart cities, I guess. But when we're talking in South Africa about water resources, unless you have a perfect recycling of water in a city, you need to move out to the countryside where there's more water, and renewable energy is easier to implement, and you don't need to take energy over such a huge grid. You lose a lot of energy transporting electricity across a copper grid. Whereas if you have a solar panel on your roof, the copper wiring is, it's just a few meters, so you don't lose unnecessary energy. So this is the benefit of going into the countryside. And most of Africa is rural, and a lot of people don't really have a huge desire to live in cities. So Africa is very uniquely positioned, unlike any other continent in the world. So don't write off Africa. Don't be surprised if Africa is a superpower, a united superpower 100 years from now. It's not impossible. Stranger things has happened. So another reason to look at Africa in a positive way. Number 5, health diplomacy, PEPFAR, TB, and the pandemic response. By the year 2000, South Africa had over 5.5 million HIV positive individuals, the highest global burden. The government's, this is a bad word, I didn't put it in, like the AI put it in. I would say victims. It's not a burden. It's a victim isn't a burden. You should take care of a victim. The government's controversial stance under President Thabo Mbeki, questioning the scientific consensus on HIV/AIDS, delayed the treatment programs. Launched in 2003 by President George W. Bush, PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, remains the single largest health assistance program ever directed to one country. Over $8.4 billion has been invested in South Africa, supporting the distribution of antiretrovirals or ARVs, health information systems, laboratory networks, and training for over 50,000 health workers. Yeah, South Africa had a massive problem with AIDS. Like, I know of people who died of AIDS. Like, any South African, like, I'm pretty sure most South Africans will be able to tell you stories, of friends or family who has died from AIDS. Like, it was so bad, we had a phenomenon called AIDS orphans, where both parents die from AIDS and then the child is orphaned. Like, it's a unique socioeconomic situation to South Africa. We're still recovering from it, you can imagine. And this PEPFAR, George W. Bush gets a lot of flack, but if you compare him to certain other presidents, he's not that bad. This PEPFAR thing is a massive thing for South Africa. I mean, to get your AIDS drugs for free is a privilege. It's not a right. I am a strong humanitarian, and I don't think you should allow people to die, but still, you should be thankful if someone saves your life. And this is what America has done. Russia didn't help us with this. China didn't help us with this. France didn't help us with this. America helped us with this. So, once again, PEPFAR isn't that well known in South Africa, and it should be. And once again, this, I'm going back towards the fact that South Africa isn't a superpower. We're a medium-sized country. So we can't, when you talk to a superpower and you're a medium-sized country, never mind if you're a small country like Luxembourg or Togo or something like that, then you need to know your place. There is a certain way you need to address them. I'm not saying let yourself be bullied or violated. I'm saying is if you want something from them, you need to speak to them in a certain way. And South Africa, I also don't think we appreciated PEPFAR enough. There's always this talk of reorientating towards the East, and I'm not against that. I'm saying spread your risk. I'm saying make as many friends as possible. But the bottom line is the so-called BRICS, or well, not so-called, it's a real thing. The BRICS Bank, is limited. It hasn't helped South Africa nearly as much as aid from Europe or aid and investment from Europe or the United States has. So this has to be taken into consideration. The US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, maintained 47 staff in South Africa. Well, I'm not sure what it is now, working on tuberculosis, maternal health, and epidemic surveillance. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the US donated over 7.5 million vaccine doses through the COVAX facility, supporting testing infrastructure and co-funding the Aspen Pharmacare vaccine production facility in oh my word, this is one of these new South African names. I'm not against new name changes in South Africa. It's so difficult to pronounce. Gikebera. I'm not going to apologize for getting it wrong, by the way, because I speak Afrikaans. There is a lot of words you, the viewer, unless you're Afrikaans yourself, of course, like won't be able to say. Like gegrond, waar gaan jy nou? Is jy reg om te ry? Try saying it. Is jy reg om te ry? Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? So please excuse me for slaughtering names, which I'm still sorry I do it, but like excuse me for slaughtering names in videos, but it's inevitable, unfortunately. I'm not a supercomputer. I'm not ChatGPT or Google. Number 6, foreign policy divergences and geopolitical tensions. The Iraq War and South African neutrality. In 2003, South Africa strongly opposed the US-led invasion of Iraq. President Thabo Mbeki urged Washington to adhere to international law and the UN Security Council procedures, criticizing what he saw as imperial overreach. South Africa's foreign policy during this time emphasized multilateralism and diplomacy, aligning more with the global south than the Western interventionist agendas. So here I have to agree with the South African stance. The Iraq War, I know Saddam Hussein was a bad hombre for those of you who are right-wing, and that's true. But the Iraq War was illegal. It was, per definition, if you go and look at laws, it was an illegal law from international legal point of view. And South Africa did the right thing to complain about it. Like, we didn't take the United States to the ICC. We just, maybe made our voice heard. So did France, by the way. And I don't think you can, to put it into perspective, when South Africa criticizes something like the invasion of Iraq or I think the invasion of Afghanistan was more acceptable because the Taliban had it coming. They brought it over themselves. But like Iraq was unacceptable, and Israel as well. Like the Israeli invasion of Gaza. Well, Israel invaded many countries many times, but like especially the Gaza one, which now probably has about 40,000 victims counting, most of them civilians. Remember, because of colonialism, like South Africa didn't just like pop out of nowhere. Like, it didn't start. South Africa, I mentioned earlier, the modern nation started in 1913. And that's a fact. But like before that, we had like the arrival of the first white settlers. That was like 1657 or 67 or something like that. A lot of people think South Africa started then, 400 years ago. No, South Africa is not even tens, it's hundreds of thousands of years old, with regards to humanity, and before that, early hominoids. You may argue, like, the earliest hominoids is found in South Africa. Okay, it oscillates between South Africa and Ethiopia, and I think Kenya. But like the newest one as of late, missing link, if you wish, was found in South Africa. So humanity sprang from South Africa. Never forget that. like we are the cradle of humanity, and this is a fact, or at least one of the most important cradles, because like of the last ice age, the only place, one of the few places inhabitable to hominoids were basically the equator, and where the weather was just perfect was South Africa. So the population is very old, very settled. And when Europeans arrived, it was colonialism, and colonialism was pretty much a crime against humanity. I know colonialism brought some good. I'm not going to argue that, but overall, like, it was very bad for the black population. South Africa's majority black African, 80%. And when South Africans, and even I'm Afrikaans, like, remember we had our own republics too, called the Boer republics, and Britain invaded us for gold. When a country like America or Israel, like, most Israelis look like me, they're white, they're not brown. When Africans see white people attacking, killing, violating brown people, it brings back visceral memories from apartheid, which isn't that long ago. Remember, it started in 48 and it only ended in 1991. Yeah, it ended in 1991. I remember, you can see from my gray beard, I remember going to places and there would be whites only bathrooms, blacks only bathrooms, and colored only bathrooms. Most of the times, obviously, only whites only bathrooms, because apartheid benefited white people. So you can't be surprised if black people look at a war where the aggressor is white against brown or black people as a repeat of this, and the trauma is being relived and the anger gets regenerated. So this is what Americans can never forget. Those of you who are African American, I guess, will have immediate empathy or understanding of this. But those of you who are white, maybe those of you who are, like, let's say, MAGA people, I don't have anything against you, but you will have a lesser understanding of this. And even if you're Afrikaans like me, we have a lesser understanding of this. We didn't get tear gas in our eyes. We didn't feel police brutality. We were not stopped and questioned by the police about our identity and our whereabouts. We weren't denied the best education. I got a great education, by the way. So one needs to be honest about these things. And a lot of South African foreign policy is born out of this, the experience of colonialism. Many countries, including China as well. China was also, China was subjected to 50 unilateral, unfair trade agreements. It was forced into it. China was forced to accept opium as payment for silk and spices and what have you. And the Chinese as well. They didn't, they have long memories. And actually, it's not that long ago. It was 1850. So you see, when China, South Africa, Brazil, long history of slavery, when they talk about these things, it comes from a very sensitive place. White people should not forget this. Western countries, Western-dominated countries, white-dominated countries shouldn't forget this. Which brings us to BRICS. South Africa joined the BRICS group, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now it's bigger. It contains Argentina and Iran and a bunch of others. Group in 2010. We were a founding member. Through BRICS, it advocates for reform of global financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and for the expansion of the UN Security Council to include permanent African representation. The US has expressed concern that BRICS, led primarily by China and Russia, is being used as a platform to weaken the US-led global governance. South Africa hosted the 2023 BRICS Summit, during which discussions of a BRICS currency and a common development bank intensified. Though South Africa maintained strong trade relations with the US, its participation in such efforts reflects its commitment to multipolar world order. Now, look, because I'm going to do some videos about neoliberalism, and you can go and have a look at those. But the IMF and the World Bank is dominated by the West. And when you take a loan from these places, quite often there's this economic hitman behavior present where you're forced into a deal which you don't really want, or that's like disproportionately bad for you, especially since the 1960s up until now. And that's why BRICS was formed. Well, less now, but that's why BRICS was formed. Is a way to use the new emergent global South economic power, especially in the case of China. China is the main driver behind this, not because they're evil or bullies or domineering, simply because they have the biggest economy and the biggest population. So obviously they are going to be the driving force. With the biggest amount of saving capital. Chinese people love saving money. So you have to understand that the behavior of the world, the World Bank and the IMF in particular, created this need for BRICS. Also, I mean, there is no NATO in Africa. There is no NATO in Asia. So, like mutual defense agreements, like China felt the need, and Russia and South Africa, that we need some protection, or at least level the playing field, both economically and militarily, and socioeconomically and culturally and what have you. Culturally as well, I didn't even mention that. Like, culturally, when you turn on the TV, and I'm not unthankful, because, you get great American TV shows, and to be honest, I prefer American and British TV shows simply because I think it's of a higher quality. I think you get great Portuguese, Spanish, and French ones too, great German ones, great Norwegian ones, or Scandinavian ones. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, I can't say any more. But bottom line is the global South does feel dominated, for example, culturally as well. So BRICS serves many purposes. One last thing about BRICS, for those of you who view BRICS as a threat to replace the dollar, and also for those of you who are left-wing who think this is going to happen, it's not going to happen. There's too much of a difference between these economies. They're very different economies. Some of them are competitors. Some of them are developed, like China. Some of them are basically not developed, like Brazil and South Africa. And, then you just get like Russia, which is basically a skunk nation. So, well, not you, but if you're Russian, I'm not talking about you ethnic Russians. I'm talking about Vladimir Putin, just to get that out of the way. Because of these differences, maybe one day, like if the US isn't like careful about the way it manages the dollar and the way it behaves, then the BRICS will get serious and they will have a currency. And that a lot of analysts say this will happen, but it's not going to happen in my lifetime. I'm pretty sure about it because of the massive differences. I mean, how long did it take the European Union to get the euro, to get even close to something that that can match up? And even when they created the euro, it was to the huge detriment of Greece, of Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, and Spain, Portugal, which didn't work the same way as Northern Europe. And like the only winner truly of, I mean, even the US exited the European Union. I know they're not part of the euro, they never were, but like the only beneficiary of the euro was Germany. Because like the franc, which was super high, got devaluated. And when it's devaluated, it's much cheaper to do business in Greece. Like the Greeks can now buy your things, but you're not buying Greek things. So, a country that enters, let's say any country that wants a common BRIC kind of currency, needs to take into account that will you benefit from this? Will you stay the same, or will you get kneecapped? And what you will probably see, what would rather happen is, let's say when South Africa trades with China, it just uses yuan. Okay, that will make more sense. Or when it trades with Brazil, it just uses real. Although then even that won't work, because that can only work if the trade balance is equal. Because then the money flows back and forth. But because what can also happen is South Africa can just be heaped up with a bunch of yuan, and if America, let's say we want to buy something from America, if America happens to accept this yuan because for some reason they want more yuan, then fine, it works out. We can buy American machinery. Or if Brazil needs yuan, we can buy Brazilian chicken, which we're already doing. But probably Brazil will also end up with lots of yuan. Brazil has a positive trade balance with China. Yeah, they do, because of all the soybeans. So maybe Brazil can relieve South Africa then of some of our yuan, but it's very complicated to get all of this right. So I think America is over concerned with BRICS. It's not a threat. It's just a parallel system. Next up, Russia, China, and their naval exercises. In February 2023, South Africa conducted joint naval drills called Exercise Mosi 2 with Russia and China off the Durban and Richards Bay coasts. The timing coincided with the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it drew sharp condemnation from the US and EU diplomats. South Africa claimed the exercises were part of a long-standing military cooperation. Yet US lawmakers like Senator Chris Coons warned that South Africa was risking its AGOA eligibility. Here I have to agree with the Senator Chris Coons. Vladimir Putin basically conducted a illegal war against, or has conducted an illegal war against the Ukraine. And South Africa, unfortunately, we were neutral officially, but you can't have military exercises with an aggressor nation in an illegal war. That's immoral. So never mind even American interests, what we did was wrong. We should not have had this exercise with Russia. And, quite often South Africa likes to pretend that we're morally superior to various other nations, but what we did was wrong. And I can understand that America would then threaten AGOA, because they would be like, how dare you? We allow all of these privileges and you don't appreciate that. The Lady R incident. In December 2022, the Russian cargo ship Lady R docked at Simonstown's naval base under the cloak of secrecy. U.S. Ambassador Royben Brigitte claimed the vessel was loaded with South African arms destined for Russia. The rand fell sharply on the news, and investors feared diplomatic fallout. President Cyril Ramaphosa launched an independent inquiry, which later cleared South Africa of wrongdoing, through skepticism remains in Washington. Yeah, this Lady R, I don't know. If South Africa sold weapons to to Russia, then you would have found traces of it in Ukrainian territory. You can recognize shells, you can recognize missiles and drones that were shot down. Okay, these things come from South Africa. as far as I'm aware, none of this has been found. So, but the problem was this Lady R thing was veiled in secrecy. Don't, if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide. Other diplomatic flashpoints. South Africa has repeatedly voted in favor of Palestinian statehood at the UN and downgraded its Tel Aviv embassy to a liaison office in 2019. It also voted against US-led sanctions in Cuba, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe, emphasizing that unilateral sanctions hurt civilian populations and are counterproductive. These votes, though consistent with South Africa's principles, have strained ties with Washington. I agree and disagree with this. The problem is, if you close your diplomacy, your embassy in Israel, even if a country, let's say 70 years ago closed their embassy in Nazi Germany, all communication stops. If you want to get something favorable, there has to be communication. If you want to get back with your ex-girlfriend or fix a bad relationship with your girlfriend, you can't put your phone in aircraft mode, like in flight mode. You need to have open channels of communication. And there was a very bad decision of South Africa to close its Israeli embassy. With regards to the votes on Cuba, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe, yes, there's lots of empirical evidence. I know under certain circumstances, sanctions work. Like when South Africans should never forget that sanctions helped force South Africa to become democratic. But it depends on, in this case, it was because a large minority, 20% of the population at that time, stood losing a huge amount of money, which they were not willing to do. In a place like Venezuela, Cuba, and Zimbabwe, you have elites, maybe no more than 1,000 people ruling the country, and they don't care about the population. And if you sanction, the population lives in fear of these governments. I've been to Cuba, and I've been on the Venezuelan border. I was too scared to enter Venezuela. I was in a small town in Colombia, but I was in Cuba, and the people live in fear of the government, in absolute fear. So, sanctions won't help. What you can do is you can sanction individuals, especially in the case of these Zimbabwe and Venezuela, their top officials love European shopping. And if you place sanctions on them, you can't use this airspace, you can't buy, you can't have an international account. If you have an account at a Chinese bank, we're going to boycott that bank. Something like that. If you sanction individuals, it may work, because if the wife can no longer shop at Harrods, she's going to be upset. Maybe she's upset enough that it will change the trajectory of the country. Number 7. Military and security cooperation between the US and South Africa. South Africa is one of the largest contributors to the UN peacekeeping mission in Africa. Through the US-funded African Contingency Operations Training and Assistance, a COTA program, American instructors have helped train South African peacekeepers for missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, and Mozambique. South African officers also attend the U.S. military institutions such as the National Defense University and the U.S. Army War College. These exchanges have built a cadre of senior defense leaders familiar with American military doctrine and strategy. Yeah, one of my friends, his dad actually went there to do this. Maritime security. Given its control of the Cape Town sea routes, South Africa is central to maritime security in the Southern Hemisphere. It participates in the US-led Obongame Express and Cutlass Express exercises aimed at counter-piracy and securing maritime trade. Yeah, South Africa, if you look at the map, it seems to be very far from Somalia, but you have, the Somalians can strike very far. And okay, I know now piracy no longer exists, but it can come back. In fact, you may, like some African countries, have a lot of problems like securing, with security. So piracy can arise at any moment in one of our neighboring countries or a country close to us. And if the US is willing to help us to combat piracy, then why not? In 2021, a joint simulation of the US Navy intercepted a mock smuggling vessel off the coast of Mozambique. The exercises included coordinated aerial surveillance and ship boarding drills, showcasing deep interoperability between the two navies. Counterterrorism and intelligence cooperation. Although South Africa and the US lack a formal intelligence sharing agreement, informal cooperation exists on counterterrorism, following insurgent attacks by Islamic groups in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province. US and South African agencies increased coordination on both border security and surveillance. Yeah, with regards to this Cabo Delgado in Mozambique that was taken over by a branch of ISIS. That's deeply problematic. By the way, it's tribal, actually. It's not religious. The rebels happen to be Muslim, but in Africa, when you have this Muslim-Christian conflicts, or these Muslim-Christian conflicts, most of the time, actually almost all the time, it's tribal. And it's about resources. In the case of Cabo Delgado, that's where the Mozambique natural gas fields are. And the Mozambique government's very corrupt and useless, way more corrupt and useless than the South African one. And they didn't share any of the proceeds or benefits of this natural gas with the local population. Therefore, essentially, it created, this problem, this insurgency. And South Africa can put it down, but South Africa needs help in terms of intelligence, satellite imaging, drone technology. We have drones, but not nearly the quality and amount of the US. And if we can get these things, our special forces can make a difference. But if you send South African troops alone into an African country, unaided by a larger power like China, Russia, or the US, or Europe, France, we will suffer a huge amount of casualties. So that's the thing. South Africa isn't the most capable country militarily. I am not saying we are incompetent. Our troops, when they are in encounters like in the Congo or Sudan, they fight valiantly. But we are limited. We're not a military nation. We are a liberal democracy. We're not geared towards war. So therefore, we need to have good relations with countries that can make war and who are willing to cooperate with us, like the US. Number 8, cultural, academic, and scientific collaboration. The Fulbright Research Exchange. More than 1,000 South African scholars have studied in the US under the Fulbright Scholarship since 1953. These alumni include prominent judges, scientists, political leaders. Dr. Glenda Gray, a Fulbright recipient, became a leading voice during South Africa's COVID-19 response. In 2022, Fulbright applications from South Africa hit a record high, reflecting continued academic admiration for US institutions. Yeah, like the rest of the globe, essentially, South Africa really needs and it really respects US scholarships. And I think many recipients of these scholarships aren't thankful enough. Like, once again, I'm talking about being thankful, but you get scholars, you get like people who study there. And like, I know, I'm not saying you should be a slave, a mental slave, and an ass licker or Uncle Tom towards someone who has given you a scholarship. I have seen, however, certain people, like becoming activists while they are studying in the country, and that's kind of like overstaying your welcome, which is very unnecessary and, impolite. That shouldn't happen. NASA, SCAR, and space science. South Africa's Square Kilometre Array, or SCAR radio telescope, is one of the most ambitious astronomy projects globally. NASA collaborates with South African scientists to analyze radio wave data and track satellites. In 2019, NASA launched a program with SANSA, not like the woman from Game of Thrones, South African National Space Agency, to monitor solar storms using South African observatories. Young South African engineers and astronomers regularly intern at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Cape Town has become a key site for space science diplomacy. SCAR, the Square Kilometre Array, is probably, I think it's the biggest telescope in the world, and radio telescope, and American help is appreciated in this regard. Film, music, and media exchange. South African cities like Cape Town and Johannesburg have become filming locations for US productions. Netflix, HBO, and Amazon have invested heavily in South African studios. District 9, filmed in South Africa, received 4 Oscar nominations and introduced a global audience to South African sci-fi cinema. That was a good movie, by the way. I love District 9. District 9, by the way, comes from a place called District 6. That's your homework. Go and figure out the connection. Musicians like Yuma Sakela and Black Coffee have toured US venues, while Trevor Noah's role to host The Daily Show made him a household name in American political comedy. Yeah, Trevor Noah is a very useful South African when it comes to South African-US relations. I think, to be honest, Trevor Noah should get a degree and maybe some training, because I believe Trevor Noah is very funny and stuff, but I believe he has artistically reached the apex of his career. And now I think he should serve the nation. I think Trevor Noah should become a permanent ambassador to the US. Few people understand the US as well as Trevor Noah, and few people are as recognized as him. So, and someone, of mixed ethnicity like Trevor Noah with a European father and an African mother is ideally placed to be a great diplomat. So please, Trevor Noah, I don't think you'll ever listen to this, but please if you can't become South African president, at least become the South African ambassador to the US. If Trevor Noah becomes South Africa's president, it will be like our own version of Zelensky. That will be awesome, by the way. It will be the best president since Nelson Mandela. Maybe even better, God knows. Unfortunately, South African trust with regards to public opinion, South African trust in the US government has declined from 49% in 2011 to 35% in 2021. The decline is attributed to US foreign policy, including Palestine, Iraq, and African sovereignty. Yet, American culture remains highly admired. Surveys show 61% of South Africans have favorable views of US movies, music, and fashion. American fast food chains like KFC, McDonald's, and Starbucks have become ubiquitous in South African cities. Wait, no, Starbucks? Do you get Starbucks in South Africa? I don't think so. I think Starbucks withdrew because it couldn't compete. We have a better coffee in South Africa. Sorry, America. It's called Seattle Coffee. And Seattle Coffee is an excellent product, and it was cheaper than Starbucks as well. So you couldn't compete. KFC, however, is extremely popular. We have a burger in South Africa called the Zinger. It's the specialized KFC burger for South Africa. It's very hot. I can eat it actually, and it's quite yummy. It's the yummiest thing on the KFC menu in South Africa, but unfortunately, it doesn't agree with my stomach. Climate technology and future engagement. Number 11. Energy transition. South Africa is the 12th largest carbon emitter globally due to primarily its dependence on coal, which we have a lot of coal, which powers about 85% of its electricity. This makes it a critical player in global climate discussions. At COP26 in 2021, the US, UK, France, Germany, and the EU pledged $8.5 billion to help South Africa transition to a cleaner energy system through the Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETP. The plan includes decommissioning coal plants, restraining affected workers, and investing in solar, wind, and hydrogen energy infrastructure. In 2023, the U.S. Export-Import Bank approved $900 million in loan guarantees for solar installations in the Northern Cape. However, implementation remains slow due to Eskom's financial troubles, community resistance in coal mining towns, and political pushback. So, that's the problem with coal, is that actually South Africa needs coal in the short term. If anyone can give South Africa 3 nuclear plants for free, I'm all for it. But South Africa can't afford nuclear. It's too expensive. Because nuclear you have to build straight away, and then you have to service the loan. With South Africa we don't have the money to service the loan. So actually in this case, coal is cheap, so we need coal, but also we need to transition to clean energy, because clean energy is, you don't need a big investment. It's very cheap to buy a solar panel. You can buy it cash. You don't need to take out a loan. At least if you do it for yourself in your own home. Even small factories, they don't, they buy it cash. They don't take loans. And South Africa has a lot of potential for wind power too, and especially in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape. However, coal in the short term is needed for economic development. South Africa is a digital powerhouse in Africa. In 2022, Google's Equano submarine internet cable landed in Cape Town, dramatically increasing regional internet speeds. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, pledged $300 million to support fiber optic network expansion in both urban and rural areas. And Cisco and Microsoft also have hubs in Johannesburg. The US also supports South Africa's digital entrepreneurship ecosystem. MIT's Global Startup Labs and Stanford's SEED program run acceleration boot camps in Cape Town and South Africa, linking local innovators with Silicon Valley mentors. So yes, basically this is another thing that so the US is very useful for, is basically with regards to digital infrastructure and lending expertise. With regards to higher educational collaboration, the University of Cape Town, or UCT, Wits University, Stellenbosch, and the University of Pretoria have active partnerships with Harvard, Yale, Duke, definitely not Dyke, and Johns Hopkins universities. Collaborative programs range from public health and epidemiology to climate science and constitutional law. For example, Wits and Johns Hopkins co-developed a model to forecast COVID-19 hospitalization across South Africa. In another case, Duke and UCT jointly established the Center for Global Mental Health that now trains clinicians across the continent. So this is another thing that, South Africa should be mindful for. I don't think it will happen, hopefully not, but if US relations collapses, we lose all of this. And the US has unique patents, knowledge, expertise that can help us in all of these areas. The Mandela Washington Fellowship, a flagship program under President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative, or YALI, has selected more than 400 South Africans since 2014 to study in US universities and in areas like public management and civil leadership. Number 30, so more, scholarships as well should really be guarded, no matter what. Legal and governance cooperation. South Africa, the US looks at helping South Africa with training in terms of judges, and they provide internships. They help us with they help the police, with cooperation with Interpol. And then lastly, I'm just going to mention that each year approximately 20,000 South Africans travel to the US for tourism, business, educational work. And this is a large number, if there's no relationship, if the US closes its embassy in South Africa, can you imagine the chaos of all of these people who want to go to the US to study, to do business, for tourism? There's a fair amount, there's a strong push on the left, from the left wing to collapse the American relationship. But a lot of these left-wing people benefit from, the US relationship. They are the ones quite often who go to study there. They are the ones who go and take their vanity Instagram pictures, at the Tower of Liberty. And this is just hypocrisy from the left, so be very careful about what you do. Then we also have the diaspora, like Elon Musk and Charlize Theron. Elon Musk, I am really not a fan of Elon Musk. I think he's an awful person. But essentially, let me rephrase this. Elon Musk is not a good person, and there's plenty of evidence for it. If you look at his tweets, or his ex-tweets, the mess that Grok made, basically Grok, some users, they asked a question about football, and Grok, the ex-AI Grok, replied with a tweet about white genocide. Another user then asked a question about the Canadian baseball player's salary. Again, Grok answered with an answer about, white genocide in South Africa, which is just nonsense, and I can't believe, Elon Musk, and then he has 15 children, he has very problematic relationships with his ex-wives. He contributes a lot in terms of technology, though, especially in terms of Starlink and Tesla and SpaceX. And these three, X is a mess. X should just be deleted. But like the other three is essential, especially Starlink for South Africa. And South Africa, like this can boost the South African economy, because Starlink, remember when South Africa has a power out, like load shedding, and we have those often. Like Starlink is independent of, remember, if there's a power out, the local cell phone tower stops working. You have no communication. You may have power on your cell phone battery, and you may have a solar panel and a battery, in your house, but you have no communication. Starlink enables communication. With Starlink, if there's a power out, business can continue, and it's a higher speed as well. So South Africans need to think carefully, if they want to force Elon Musk into a corner, if they insult Elon Musk too much, Elon Musk needs to be respected simply because he's the richest man in the world. And with that comes power. And that's all I want to say. Thank you, America. Thank you, South Africa, for listening. And I hope we can remain friends and expand our relationship, and that we can respect each other. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.